the two, you know, two culture at the same time.
Hello, I'm Erin Becker, Director of the Cambridge Art Association, and this is Creative Process. My guest this month is local artist Gessica Silverman. Welcome, Gessica.
Hi, Erin. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Gessica, tell us a little bit about your artwork.
Well, I am an artist, and I paint, I draw, and I sculpt, depending on sort of what strikes me. Right now, I've been focusing on painting, doing, I would say, highly textured works out of acrylic, and also some more recently in oil. But this all has evolved from works I've done with acetate, and then soft sculpture that I've worked on in felt and in vinyl.
Excellent. And what's your background? Have you always been an artist? When did you first start making artwork?
Oh, that's a good question. I know the answer to this one. So I've always been making art since I was very little. My first memory of it was my father, I think we were about 4 or 5, got us these really nice colored pencils. Not like crayons, like fancy stuff that you'd get at the art store. And like a whole set, like 50 of them. So I would draw, my sister would draw, and I just would be fascinated with that. I did that for years. In high school, I focused on photography, black and white. In college, I focused on ceramics.
Oh, wow.
After college, I still did some ceramics, but the internet kind of was booming then.
All right.
So there was a little bit of a transition, and I focused on working on stuff online, and sort of bolstered my skill set that way. Did that and continue to do that, less artistically, but more just because. But I do remember my first job as a web designer. I said, I can't believe they pay me to draw. So I would draw sketches with pencil, and then about, I would say 6, 7, somewhere around there, several years ago, I kind of like had this gnawing urge to like do something more again, and so I recommitted myself to my art practice. I went back to school. I went to the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I did a program there called their post-bac program. Excellent program. I really enjoyed it. Learned a ton. Actually did another year there. And then from that, I would say that was sort of the branching off point to my serious commitment towards my art and my current work. And now I have a studio in Somerville.
Excellent.
So yeah, that's how that came to be.
So you've worked in a lot of different mediums. How did you settle on painting? What was it about painting that kind of drew you in?
That's a good question too. When I was at museum school, we were doing a variety of things. I was actually working a lot in fiber, doing sculpture with paper, making my own pieces like that. I was working with felt. I had to paint because that's part of the curriculum. I had to take drawing as part of the curriculum. But painting was always elusive to me. It was really hard, and I didn't quite get it at first. Like I'm really I'm like a tactile person. I can figure out very, very quickly how to make things in 3D in space with any kind of materials. But painting was always this kind of enigma.
It's like a two-dimensional challenge.
It was totally a two-dimensional challenge, and I even had a professor once, because I was working on a variety of projects, say,
we press record.
oh, I didn't, say that I kind of should put my paintbrush down. And that kind of challenged me even further. So I focused on these other pieces, but always in the back of my mind, I wanted to paint. And so after working through the content in these other mediums, I went back to painting. It was almost like walking through a portal. Like one day I just took this canvas. I had like this huge canvas. It was like 5 feet by 3 feet. And I tried to paint it like 4 or 5 times, and it was a disaster.
That's a big painting.
It's a big painting. It's overly ambitious. It's like kind of a ridiculous challenge for somebody who's kind of new to painting. But I was like, wanted to do it. but I hated it so much because it never worked that I actually shoved it behind the shelving unit in my studio and like pushed it back against there, and I just was like, I hate you.
Putting you
I'm
away.
putting you away. Me and painting, this is over. We are not friends right now. This is not going to work out. I'm going to have to figure something else out. But then, like, for some reason, I worked through all this other stuff, and I just one day needed to pull that canvas out. And it was like, from that point on, I felt like I could started to understand paint as a medium, and started to understand how to use the tools. And that alone, like being able to understand how that kind of feels and how it works, allowed me to have the confidence to kind of move forward and take risks to learn more within the medium.
That's interesting. We're going to see some of Jessica's artwork shortly, but knowing that you came from a background working with textiles and three-dimensional objects, it does come through in your pieces, and it's interesting to I don't know if you're conscious of that, but that some of the shapes and colors and texture that you capture, that is evident in your background in using more tactile materials.
Oh, definitely. And I think some of the work intentionally is highly textured and highly, there's a lot of energy coursing through, particularly the ground, if you will, and that's intentional. And it was really important to me when I was picking up painting and really kind of feeling good about it, that type of thing come through. And I actually, if you want to know, I can tell you a little bit about the process of how those paintings came to be.
Well, let's look at some of the artwork, and we can talk about the process.
Okay.
All right.
So let's start with, we can start with this piece. This one's called The Dance, and this is representative of some of the work that I did, the soft sculpture. That's that I did. This is actually felt. I also did some stuff in vinyl. Had this total obsession with felt for like about a year.
Okay.
And this hangs off the wall, and you can see a lot of shadows.
Okay. And how large is that in real life?
That's 6 feet by 6 feet.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Then I have this work. This is actually, the content or the forms come out of this piece. This piece was done on acetate, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I think you can see some similarities in kind of the marks, the lines, the forms, the figures. To me, there are figures in there. There's like someone looking this way and someone looking that way, and kind of this guy on the side walking away. I anthropomorphize things. I see entities in things. So that comes through in that. And then the evolution is to things like this, that are highly textured, highly colorful, and the like. I can show you another example. This, I think there's more of a direct correlation between those 3D pieces and this, if you look closely.
And now with this piece, are you scraping away to reach that colorful ground? Is this painted over? What is your, we're going to talk a little about your creative process. So in creating, how are you creating this? What are the, without giving away all of your tricks, you know, what are you thinking about when you're making that piece that we just saw, and what is your process? Do you feel like you're freeing something? Do you feel like you're constructing something? How is that working in your mind when it's all happening?
Okay, so there's a lot there in that question.
There is a lot in that question.
Let me think about how I want to address it. So I do get that question a lot. Like, is there something behind that? Like, people think I maybe painted the entire canvas and then like scraped it away or painted over it.
See it one more
Yeah,
time.
see in the middle there, People think like, oh, maybe I painted the whole thing, all those multicolors, and then painted over it or what have you. I didn't. I actually, what I do is I work on the ground first. And it's very important to me, particularly in this series, that the ground be highly textured. And I think that's a residue from the soft sculpture. Like, there was something about that like really needed to be there physically. Not just an illusion, like physically. And so I have a proprietary blend of materials I use to kind of make the ground have the undulations and rhythms that I want it to have.
Okay.
And then once that's settled, I work on the ground from a color perspective and a content perspective, and I look at it, and I kind of glaze and I palette knife and I get sort of worked up to some magical point where these other things, so I consider these characters.
Okay.
These are two things kind of looking at each other in my mind.
Fascinating.
Other people see entirely different things, and that's 100% valid. But what I see are these two things looking at each other, and for me this painting is actually called Who Are You?
Okay.
It's like a reflective piece.
Okay.
So when I was working on this piece is actually very large. It's about 5 feet by 4 feet.
Okay.
So I was thinking about self-reflection and can I paint, and how's this working, and is there anything there, and you know, those kinds of ideas, and this sort of hard look at myself or hard look at at painting, like we're like looking at each other and saying like, are you bringing it, like what's there, is there something? So I also wanted to know, as reflections, right, are usually like the same, and I knew, because if you look at the mark making in the middle of it,
Let's show that again.
it's like highly gestured.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of color in there.
Yes.
And I knew based on the process of doing that, that it would be like almost impossible to recreate that as an actual reflection while retaining the energy and aesthetic of that side. So I kind of had to like have a leap of faith and kind of work with it color-wise.
Yes.
But also thought about like, well, you know what? When you look at yourself in the mirror, you see something and other people see other things.
That's true.
And so I kind of had to like make peace with that and say like, that's okay. Yeah.
I like that. So you talked about, you know, this being, you know, who are you, and questions of who you are as an artist as well.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you're exploring that a lot through your artwork? Is that a common theme that you see?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, so I talk about these in terms of characters. This series evolved from a set of, I guess, a cluster of paint drips that I saw on the wall. And like,
Really?
yeah, like seriously, like I walk down the
Inspiration is
street
everywhere.
I walk down the street and like I see the world totally like very differently than other people. I'm like totally fascinated by like a crack in the floor. I think it's the most beautiful line I've ever seen. I think, you know, flats, like the variegations on leaves are interesting, patterns like that. This was like a set of paint drips that were kind of on the wall, and normally paint drips are like super boring, like who cares?
Yeah.
They're like the residue, like left over of a paint. They're not thought about, and you know, gravity's applied to them, and they kind of like go on the path of least resistance. So I saw this cluster, and I thought it was gorgeous, and I captured it, and I started working with it, and that sort of falls through all of this work. And through that, like understanding the positives and negatives, I actually developed these characters. And so these are kind of inherent in those drips.
Okay.
And as I did that, I was creating a language that I could use to express myself, and I could use to have these different kind of scenarios happen that ultimately were a reflection of my experiences in the world.
Interesting. So,
Yeah.
you know, we're talking about creative processes and how those work, and, you know, you bring up the inspiration that you find in the everyday. So where do you find your inspiration, and how do you capture that? Do you keep a journal? Is it on your iPhone? You know, what are you doing to track some of those ideas?
Tracking is hard because there's
Yeah.
so much stimulation and so much information that it's tough. Plus, there's all these media, right? You have your iPhone, you have your this, you have your that. I do actually end up tracking it on my iPhone because I have the camera and I have the notes and all that stuff. But it's not as satisfying as when I write it down or keep it in a journal. So I do both, and I have like all these different ways of tracking it, but and they kind of come up at the right time. I've come to have faith that if I lose track of it, it will come around again.
It'll come back.
Yeah, that actually happened. I like did something a couple years ago, and then last week, I don't know, all of a sudden I cared about it and it showed up.
You had a light bulb moment.
It did. I was like, oh, I need to paint that.
Do you keep all of your journals?
I do.
Do you ever go through, you know, an old one from like 5 years ago or so and flip through it?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to me to hear about how artists, you know, inspiration really is everywhere, and hearing about how artists keep track of that, whether it's through a journal or, you know, Pinterest is a great way to track
Oh, I like
that now.
Pinterest. Actually,
Instagram, kind of all the social media things, I think make it both easier and more difficult because there's so much to be inspired by.
Yeah,
kind of
it's
lurking
kind of,
out there.
It's kind of an overstimulation, and it's a little bit hard to kind of hunker down and focus in that from that perspective. I do enjoy Pinterest. I keep track of artists that I like on Pinterest.
Okay.
Not necessarily like, I don't know, sometimes, because it's hard for me to like aggregate images of everything and have one spot for it.
Mm-hmm.
I also keep them in bookmarks on the website,
There you go.
my browser, so I can always like recall them.
I always find I have too many bookmarks, so
I do,
I like
and then
that,
it's
and then, it all
confusing.
gets lost.
It gets messy.
So tell us a little bit about, kind of, we talked a little bit about the evolution of your artwork. I know that your work deals a lot with journeys, whether they're personal journeys or imagined journeys. What are you working on right now? What's the current journey towards?
The current journey. It's
Or what are
always
you
a
trying
journey.
to work, or what are you trying to work through in your artwork now? And are you hitting any stumbling blocks in your creative process?
I am actually, and so this body of work we were just looking at, I had like 21 paintings in that grouping, and I felt like, all right, I've been working on this for a while, and the way I work is I work it, and when there's like nothing more to say about it, then it's sort of, I'd say not closed, but like it sits over here for a while. And so these characters, this body, like didn't have anything more to say. We talk, me and my paintings, we chat like a lot. And so all of a sudden I was like, all right, now what do I do? I have all this stuff I want to say.
Yes.
'Cause it like comes from here. It's not like, oh, I love, you know, I had the paint trips and I loved those. But the paint trips led me to a visual language. The visual language helps me express what I like, the content that I'm trying to say. And the content has to be something that I'm inspired by, and the inspiration is less inspiration than like a deep-seated feeling and need to create. That's sort of
let
like,
it out.
it's got to like come out like some sort of like truth or mystery that needs to be solved.
Yeah.
And so it's more of like, I guess it is like a journey. Like I'll just feel like right now I've been in the studio and I'm working on some new pieces, and it kind of took me a little bit to like settle on what was grabbing me. I tried this and they kind of like dead ends, you know, or not dead ends, but just stopping points for now. And I went to like, I've been looking at memory, and because these were about experiences, and this next set I think is going to be about memory, and I kind of had to look inside to see like what I wanted to talk about that, and I'm not quite there yet. I don't know if I really answered your question, but
No, I mean, I think it answers the question of the need to create, and so much of art making is based on some kind of internal impulse. And I think sometimes the artist understands it as it's happening, sometimes it becomes apparent once it starts to kind of exit whatever the internal space is, but that it's this fundamental need and desire to make something because you have something to
I have to say
express.
something and express something.
Whether it's response to, you know, world events, personal events, sort of global and local, all of that, of the ways that artists are able to visualize. I mean, you're talking about visual languages, and it's being able to communicate an idea in a very universal way.
Yeah, and I tend to, I agree with that, and I don't know, it's like it needs to come out, and I often just have no idea what it is.
Until it's out there.
Until it's out there, and even when it's out there, it's a process and a journey to get through to the point where I kind of start to understand what it is about. And even as I understand what it is about, I don't quite solidify it until it's sort of like done, and then I have to like name the thing.
So you were talking about kind of experimenting with a couple of different things, and that they just weren't really, you weren't really feeling it. So what's your kind of spaghetti test? What is it that when you throw it against the wall and it sticks, how do you know that it's sticking? What is that feeling?
It's like, I don't know, like I get...
But your face just lit up.
Exactly,
so.
like I know it, because it's like all I could see in my head was, like, it's like when you reach into something, or you're like reaching, not down a hole, because that sounds awful, but you're like, there's a lot here, or like, there's like infinity out there.
It's like you feel like okay,
there's
I
a lot
reached
of
this benchmark and I can keep going past.
Yeah, or I start to work it out on the canvas, or however. But I'll just use canvas because that's where I'm focused now. I start to work it out on the canvas, and I'm kind of like scratching my head like, this is an interesting problem. I know that there's something here that I need to say, and I have my work goes through many, many, many iterations, lots and lots of layers, and so I guess that's why I'm thinking like depth, like physical depth, because I really am building it up, and so when I know that there's a lot there, I can feel it when I start to paint. I'm like, oh, and the painting talks to me. Like the painting will say back, like look in, look in more. Keep going.
That's interesting. Before this interview, you and I talked about an essay that James Baldwin wrote in 1962 called "The Creative Process," and one of the parts of the essay, I'm just going to read it out. Is that the artist is distinguished from all other possible actors in society, the politicians, legislators, educators, and scientists, by the fact that he is his own test tube, his own laboratory, working according to very vigorous rules, however unstated these may be, and cannot allow any consideration to supersede his responsibility to reveal all that he can possibly discover concerning the mystery of being a human being. And I think that what you're talking about very perfectly reflects what he's talking about, is that the artist is here to reveal parts of all of us, whether your experience is like my experience or anybody else's. There is this universal nature into this creation of what you're trying to say and how you're able to convey these ideas that may be personal or may be more broadly applicable through a painting or through a cut felt piece or whatever.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I was, when you were talking, all I could say was like, I felt a responsibility to do this, but I don't know who's saying that, but I feel like a need to do it because I know that I've succeeded in expressing something that's somewhere when someone's come to the piece and it resonates with them in some way. May not be what I said, what I'm trying to express, but for some reason they see something in it that reflects them at some level. So,
what's the most sort of gratifying response that you've had to your artwork?
When people just enjoy it.
Yeah.
I think that's it. A lot of people look at it, have questions, aren't sure if they should be reading it a certain way. But when someone just looks at it, and like I can see on they don't have to say anything, but I can see on their face that something has registered with them.
The wheels are turning.
The wheels are turning, that they've connected with it. That's really, really satisfying. Yeah.
Excellent. We only have a couple of minutes left, but some closing thoughts from you about the creative process. Anything that sort of we haven't covered yet that you would like to talk about?
I think it's necessary and it's really hard.
Yeah.
It's like really, really hard to push through and keep going because there's so many things that will say like no, or this isn't going to work, or oh, you totally screwed that up, or oh God, I just painted over like the best thing I ever did. And just to like push through it and to take risks is really important, because through this process I've learned so much about myself and so much about the world around me, and my ability to communicate, that I don't know, I'm very grateful and appreciative of that. And yeah,
To be able to have that outlet.
to be able to have that outlet, and to be able to like be so thoughtful in that pathway, in that sort of way of moving forward.
Excellent. And now, if people wanted to see your artwork, where else can they see it?
Right now they can see it on my website, which is www.Gessica, Gessica Silverman.com. I also have artwork in shows periodically. I've had a bunch at Cambridge Art Association. Wonderful
Yes.
venue. And I recently had a solo show at Zeitgeist Gallery in Beverly. But keep an eye out.
Well, what's your next project? What are you working towards right now?
I'm evolving the paintings.
Yes.
And I'm going to see where they go.
All right.
Oh, and I also have some work that's going to be in Studio Visit, which is a book that comes out this month.
Very exciting.
So that's exciting.
Very exciting.
So you can see it there. You can see it at Studio Visit.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And you also do open studios? at
Oh
some
yeah,
point?
I do. I do open studios. So come to open studios. I'm in on Pearl and Bradley. So
Okay.
at Mad Oyster Studio.
Excellent.
Mad Oyster Studio.
And
Come.
that's the first weekend in May.
Yes, definitely.
May 2nd and 3rd. You should definitely come and visit
Check it out.
Gessica. And you can see her artwork on her website, and also you can find it through our website, which is cambridgeart.org, under our artists. And thank you
Thank you.
for watching Creative.